Hey crafty friends, I'm Nikki. I'm so glad to have you here on my channel again. Today we're going to be looking at 3 different ways that you can add interactive DIY elements to your cards to create really fun pop-up cards. We're going to look at making a DIY tassel, a pop-up, and we're even going to use some of our supplies in a way that you might not have ever tried before to really up our background. So here's how the card works. It goes in an envelope flat just like any other card, but when it comes out, it pops up. Can you see the pop-up part? So we're going to be making this card, this tassel, and we're going to be doing some special things to the background. So I can't wait to show you all of the fun things that I came up with. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and let's get right into this video. Okay, let's get started with what I'm using today. I'm using some new products from the Paper Tray Ink company, and they are grad related, but remember this video is also about doing these things without any specialty dies. So I'm basically using a square die. This is going to end up being our graduation hat. You could do this with a paper trimmer. Just trim yourself a square, and I did 1 black square and 2 white squares, and you're going to see why, because we're going to make a pop-up mechanism. And so you can do that with whatever you have. It does help to have some type of scoring board to make a nice fold in these, but you could do this by hand as well. Let's start by scoring our squares in half, exactly. And we're going to do that for both of our white squares. Make sure we've got them nice and even, and then really press that fold down so we've got a nice fold. So I'm going to repeat that with the second square, going right down the middle. And I can't tell you exact measurements. I lined it up by lining a point with a number on my scoreboard and then following that and just trying to keep it straight. Did it always work out perfectly? No, but I just went down and cut it in half. We can always trim a little bit of this if we need to, if you don't get your mark exactly right, but having it half really is going to help with the pop-up effect. Now, this card was inspired by a card that Jennifer McGuire made recently. She did this with labels. I'm doing it with a graduation hat because I think that it looks so cool with a little hat popping off. But you could pop off any type of shape, anything that you want. We're going to add lots of extra details that are pretty DIY to this card just to show you that you really can stretch your supplies. Now, I love that this Paper Tray ink set comes with stamps that fit perfectly on this graduation hat. I think that breaking up this solid color is going to look really nice, and I went on and added some anti-static powder because I'm going to heat emboss. I want this to be bright white, and to me, the way you can get the brightest white stamping is using white heat embossing. If you don't have white and heat embossing, you don't have some type of stamp that you want to put on your solid image, you could always hand letter this. So if I was going to make a bright white sentiment on black with a pen, I would suggest using the Jelly Roll Bold White. I will link that in the description for you in case that's something you're interested in. I'm using the Wow embossing powder that is the ultra bright white, and I know that sometimes it's scary to people to use white heat embossing powder on black paper. That's why I added so much powder earlier, and you'll see that if you do a good job with your anti-static powder, you have very little cleanup. You do want to make sure that you're really looking at it and that you don't have any specks of that white, because once they heat up, they're going to be bright and it will look like a speckled hat if you didn't do a good job with your embossing. So I usually take a little brush and I brush off any areas that are a problem. I used a microfiber towel to kind of clean that powder off, and you can always, once you've heat embossed, just go over the area. So that heat embossing is like plastic. So then after you've done it, you can easily take a rag and move over it to remove the excess powder and get your nice bright black color back. Now, when I looked at this, I felt like this graduation hat needed something else. And when I was thinking about our next like DIY hack that we were going to do, I thought I might need to have a brad here so that I can add a tassel to this. So I'm using kind of a sharp tool and just guessing approximately at the middle, and I'm making a hole through this piece so that I can stick a little small brad through. See how I made a hole? So now I can take one of these little black brads and stick it through the middle. You could do this if you didn't want to have a hole here. You could do it with like a little jewel or something, or you don't even have to do it. But I wanted to create this little raised area, and I thought I might need to add my tassel to it. I end up doing something a little bit different, but it really does give it a nice 3D look. So next we're going to create our tassel, and this is why I put a brad here, because I thought I was going to hang my tassel off the side, but then I realized that that's going to interfere with the writing that I have here, and when the card is standing up, this is going to fall down and cover up my congrats grad. So I decided to go from the back with this. So let's make a little homemade tassel. I'm not going to use anything but some DMC floss for like cross stitching. And I'm just going to wrap it around my fingers. Okay. So this is the simplest way to make a tassel for me, is to just get myself some layers, wrap them around my finger. And you can do this. It kind of depends on how thick you want it, everything like that. But you can remember, you can always trim if you get too much. And then of course I run into a knot, which happens all the time. And I'm going to keep on doing this. And then once I've got it to the thickness that I think will work great for a tassel, I'm going to trim, and I'm going to show you what to do. So I'm just trimming a little bit, and I don't have my good fabric scissors, so you'll see me kind of chopping away at it. Now I'm going to just kind of look at how much space I need this to take up on the card. I'm going to grab another piece of thread and tie a knot at the top. I'll use this piece of thread also to attach it to the card. So I'm going to leave the strings of this thread pretty long, and we're just tying a simple knot at the top, probably about a third of the way down, because you want to have that little loop at the top of your tassel. Okay, and I did knot that twice just to be safe. So now you've kind of got a little loop at the top, and you've got lots of loops at the bottom. So now we need to trim this into hanging. So just kind of cut it right in the center. And now you've got all these little pieces hanging here that are like the tassel. When I looked at this tassel, I decided that it might be a little bit large. So you can always trim from the bottom and make it just whatever size you want it to be. So you can always give it a haircut, if something's sticking out that it shouldn't be and it's not hanging the right way, just trim off those little pieces. And then you've got your nice little tassel here. And I'm going to still leave these strings kind of long, because I've got to decide how I'm going to get this on the card. And not only how I'm going to get this on the card, but how I'm also going to have the pop-up feature for this hat and not interact or interfere with my tassel at the same time. When dealing with thread and ribbon, I really love using what's called zots or glue dots. They're already adhesive little pieces you can stick on, and I used it to hold this tassel down. Okay, now it's time to make the main feature of our card, which is this pop-up feature. So I'm going to go in, look at my little square, and create a flap that I can attach the hat to, okay? So I'm looking at it and trying to decide about how much I need. You only need one of these folded over flaps per square, because the other part of your square, or I guess you would say it kind of looks like a diamond right now, is going to be attached to the card base. So we need these little flaps to attach the hat to, and then we're going to leave the other side of the square blank. So I just folded over about a fourth to an eighth of an inch, maybe a fourth of an inch over, just enough to get a little adhesive on. And then we're going to put these on the card like this, attach the hat to the top of these with some double-sided adhesive. Then we can grab the whole thing and attach it to the card. So this will stick on those little flaps, but you still want to have some movement where the rest of the card can kind of bounce up and pop up. So I'm adding double-sided adhesive to each of these little, I'm going to call them like wings. They're like little wings that are going to hold on to our graduation cap. And I actually went and got a little bit smaller double-sided adhesive so that I could cover this whole triangle area. Then we'll attach them to the graduation hat. So I removed the double-sided adhesive, and now I'm looking at how to line this up. I want all of the white to not show, so I'm making sure that I get this lined up right in the center, and then I can attach my flap, which I just did with a little bit of push, and you can see that it's going to start popping off. So let's do the other side so I can show you the popping mechanism. So I'm adding double-sided adhesive to that little flap, and then let's attach it. So this next side's a little trickier because we've got our tassel, so you want to make sure that your tassel doesn't get stuck behind this. And then I'm lining this up directly in the center like I just did, where the backs of these touch each other. and making sure I've got it good, nice, snug behind my square. And then I'm going to press the side down with the adhesive. So I had to do a little adjusting there with my hands, but now I've got it good and pressed down. And then I'll show you how this kind of pops off of the page once we've got the adhesive good and stuck. See how that lifts up off the page? It's going to look so cool, and I'll show you how it works. So you push down, and then when it's coming out of the envelope or whatever it's pushed down in, it's gonna pop up off the page. Check out how cute it is. On the left-hand side of the screen, I'm moving it up and down. It pops up, which is so cool. So let's talk about our third hack, which is how we can create some beautiful backgrounds with things you probably have laying around your craft room, and using them in a different way. We're gonna start with specialty paper. I wanted a really pretty basic white background, but I wanted it to have some texture. So I'm using this mulberry paper in white and just gluing it to a piece of white cardstock. That immediately gives it extra texture. You could use some different types of cardstock that you have. Or if you have some tissue paper or some napkins that are white, something that just has a texture to it that you could glue onto a card base will really give your card that extra little detail that people are looking for. So we have that texture with the paper that we're using, and then this is actually a hot foil plate, but you're looking for something that has texture that you can kind of press down into the paper. I'm going to be using a die cutting machine. If you don't have a die cutting machine, from what I understand, you can actually do this with a rolling pin. It's just creating some pressure on the paper from these metal plates that will give you a nice impression into your already textured material. And this top one is kind of rubbery. It's made for embossing, and it's not as hard so that it doesn't cut your actual piece of paper, but just makes a nice image. Let me try to show you how that worked out. I'm adding some extra height. If ever you think that it's not a deep enough impression, add more materials to what's called the sandwich or the die cutting sandwich, or add more pressure. That's basically what you're doing. I didn't get much on that one, so now I'm adding a little bit more pressure to my machine, and you're going to be amazed when you see what this looks like. It looks amazing. I'm going to hold it up to the camera for you. Can you see those little stars in there? Now that we have our background together, we can start attaching this. So I'm going to add glue. You could do this with double-sided adhesive. I just want the freedom to be able to move this around a little bit. So I'm just adding glue to these panels. This is what will be stuck to the card. The rest is going to be popping up. So just hold it all carefully together. I actually ended up getting a little bit of glue on my fingers because I was making sure to hold on to this. And then don't play with the mechanism too much. Actually put something on top to hold it down. I decided that I was going to add just a little bit more. And you see, I grabbed some confetti and actually spilled it on the card and kind of loved how it looked. So I'm going to use a little tool and pick up these pieces, make little dots of glue, and add those little pieces of confetti plus the "you did it" to it. And these little confetti pieces, yes, they are a pain and it takes a little while to add them, but I'm terrible about using them on anything else. And this card, to me, it just looked perfect and really suited it because you had those beautiful stars in the background, but you also have these little confetti pieces that you're adding on top. And that just made the card for me. So I'm going to do a couple of little split screens so you can kind of see how this card is moving, because I know that it's so much different when you have this card in your hand and you can see how big and how cool this pop-up looks. So I'm trying to show you from some different angles so that you can see how that works. So feel free to kind of rewind and go back and look, but I'm also going to pop my head up in the screen and show you on camera. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed making this fun pop-up card. It would really make a great birthday, graduation, wedding, just something fun to make that little interactive piece right there without really having to do anything special. You don't need any special tools. You can do this with lots of different items. So thank you so much for joining me. Make sure that you don't miss my latest popular video that I'll pop up at the end. And make sure you've hit the like and subscribe if you want to see me in your feed with more free tutorials. Then you need to make sure you're subscribed. All the products that I used in this video will be linked in the description below, so check those out if you're going shopping, and I hope that you have a great day. Bye!